can't pay full attention to the program. So thanks for making that sacrifice. So I am going to introduce Tania Schlatter, who is moderating the session, and then I think the speakers will introduce themselves. Tania leads UX and UI work across product development teams at the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard University. And she also teaches interaction and information design at Northeastern University. She co-wrote visual usability principles and practices for designing digital applications, and co-owned Nimble Partners, a UX design consulting firm, after holding leadership positions in design and communications at ATG, MIT, and Suffolk University. And I just want to show you the book real quick. This is Visual Usability. It's a really cool book. I just started reading it, and there are things in here that I'm like, I thought of myself as a usability person, but there are things I've been trying to figure out for so long, and they're, this explained it.
Cool.
So,
thank you.
Anyway, I think we're good to go.
We're good to go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. And I just want to say double thank you to Dan, because the amount of work that he's done to organize this event is awesome. So thank you, and thank you to the sponsors and you guys for being here, and my very accomplished and diverse panelists. So the goal of this session is to talk about the IA element in practice. None of us have information architect in our title, and I would bet many of you don't as well. However, to the points that Abby Covert made, information architecture is extremely important if we are working with people, information, technology, interaction. It's a key part of what we do. So what we hope to do in this session is to bring what we do to light a little bit and name it. So this session is going to be a little bit of a mix of formal and informal. Pretty soon I'm going to hand it over to the panelists, and they're going to introduce themselves and kind of talk about a time that they felt like they were doing IA at work. And we'll have one more question, and then we're going to hopefully open it up to the audience. So if you can be thinking about any questions that you have for anyone up here, then we can have a great discussion. So I think with that, I am going to turn it over to Priyama Barua, and take it away.
Thank you. So I'm Priyama Barua. I'm an Experience Strategy Director at MadPow. That might be a title that many are unfamiliar with. I still have trouble explaining it, even though I've been doing that for 5 years now. But in short, we try and understand the experience that customers want to have with the company, and then the strategy of the company, everything about the company, the way they price, the way they speak to their customers, are all designed around that customer experience. So to be able to do this, one of the methods that we use is service design. And that's something I'm going to be talking a lot about today. So you'll see that visual up on the screen that should hopefully help you understand what service design really is. So services are anything which is intangible, banking, finance, as well as service elements of actual physical products, so whether it's a laptop or a laundry device in your house. So service elements are often intangible. And what service designers do is try to concretize that into interactions or touch points. So whether that's digital, human, space, something that's printed out, a signage, just like this whole ecosystem of things that people are interacting with. And then we map out what are the processes that are happening, what are the people that the customer is coming into contact with, and also the props up there that you see, so the digital elements. So using this conversation, I started thinking about how service design and IA sort of fit together. And I realized that that quote by Richard Buchanan sort of sums it up, because Service design really is trying to give people the right information at the right point of time so that they can do the task that they set out to do, making sure that they know also where to find those tools to do that actual task. So I'll use that as a way to intro myself, just as that is the role that I play, and that is the perspective of IA that I'll be bringing to this conversation.
Great, thank you. But actually, before we move on, I mean, that quote and what you're describing sounds a lot to me like context, like you're providing the context. Do you think about it like that at all?
Absolutely, and context with the company, with the client, or with the product that we're thinking of, as well as the wider ecosystem. We chatted about this earlier. Context in service design is so difficult to really narrow down because there's no end to it. The more you think about it, it just keeps widening from that inner circle of company to community to systems to government to it just keeps widening.
It's big.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm gonna go ahead. Okay, Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Diamond. I am a user experience designer. I work for AIR Worldwide. It is not an airline. It is applied insurance research, and as a user experience designer there, I help the company get their products ready to go in front of clients that need to do insurance analytics. Helps them price their products. I've been with them for almost 4 years now. I've been working as a designer for about 25 years. In that time, there's always been a word or an acronym in front of that designer. Graphic designer, web designer, visual designer, and more recently in the last 7-8 years, UX designer. I think when I finally, I came up through the advertising agencies after I finished my degree at Mass Art in illustration and art history. Had nothing to do with design per se. And came up through the advertising agencies in Boston, Greater Boston, a lot of startups, in-house creative services teams, and occasionally landing, doing contract and freelance, and occasionally full-time, like where I am now. Back in 2000 was probably when I found myself doing UX for the first time. But like a lot of the stories I hear about anyone doing UX, and again, I'm going to probably be a little acronym-centric here. Much like Dan mentioned at the beginning, some of us may not count ourselves or call ourselves information architects, but we have deep connections to it. So again, a lot of my work is basically as a user experience designer. So I found myself doing UX, more by accident than anything else. I was working at Staples, working on their B2B e-commerce site, and because it wasn't Staples.com, the much sexier e-commerce site that everyone else wanted, it was a full team of designers and researchers and so forth, and I was basically the sole designer to help pull this thing together. So, and 20 years ago, I was still just coming out from the world of pure visual design and brochureware, if anyone remembers calling websites brochureware. And I'm just sticking up Post-it notes all over my cubicle and drawing on the windows and just trying to solve these design problems of getting the right information to people that needed to buy their office supplies for their fleets and their offices across the country. And I didn't even know I was doing UX at that point. I sort of found out sort of after the fact. And I found that tends to be a fairly typical, not uncommon at least, experience for a lot of fellow designers that they didn't know they were doing UX until someone told them. So where is this subway picture coming from? The question we were asked to think about was, when did you realize you were doing IA? And it's not so much about when, so I gave you my sort of moment back 20 years ago, but I find I'm doing IA or solving for the user experience all the time. This is just one that I found a little amusing for myself, that as I'm riding the orange line, I might have my headphones on, I might have my head in a book. Maybe they're not announcing what stop you're at. And as a tall person, you might not see what stop you're at. And I was just thinking, you might, crouch down and figure out, maybe I'll see something that will tell me, am I at State, am I at Downtown Crossing, I don't know. And then maybe there's only just an orange stripe and there's still no label. And you go, okay, I don't think I've missed my stop yet, because all these, they start to look the same after a while. The good news is I've never missed my stop. But what I'm doing in those moments, I find myself doing, is sort of solving the, well, wouldn't it be great if they had more of that, State, 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 or Downtown Crossing, all the way across, so there's no chance of missing it. Or maybe some tiles or paint job on the floor that would just DTX, let you know that you're at Downtown Crossing. So in my case, I might see the floor before I'm going to see some name across the top of the wall. So to wrap up on that, it's just something that I find myself doing more and more when I'm driving, when I'm on the train, solving UX, IA problems sort of almost instinctually at this point. So
it sounds like you're looking for markers. You're looking for additional markers, or there are markers missing in this context.
Well, very much so. And that's one other thing I want to kind of draw back to, sort of my roots in visual design, is the thread that sort of connects everything about what I've been doing, at least, is the art of communication. And it's what we as the practitioners are helping our products and applications communicate, but also it's communication's a two-way, hopefully a two-way exchange. And based on what we deliver, our users are communicating back to us. They're providing us some affirmation. They've clicked on the button that they need. We hope they would click on, that kind of thing. And with that, I'm thinking about how well are we listening. So that's something I hope I can share with you today, is that art of communication, how I apply it in my work.
That's cool. And I think of like the marker and the looking for the markers and kind of the where am I, that directly relates to what Heather was showing in some of those website taxonomies and navigation systems, where she's saying if you repeat where the user is, they're looking for that. It's like a signpost through the space. So in digital web space, but also in physical travel. Okay, Allison.
Hello. My name is Allison Herrera. Feel free to connect with me. I think it helps me a lot in my professional work when I have a good connection network, because for projects and for seeing what's going on, it helps a lot. So my background is actually in universities, nonprofits, libraries, and museums. Right now I'm at the Harvard Medical School. I'm a user experience researcher, and my department is the Countway Library of Medicine. So for my department, I lead user experience projects. And so for IA, where I wanted to start was when you Google IA and look at articles and books, I think the #1 visuals you see are these charts, these tree jacks of information architecture. And I think that if I were trying to teach AI, what is information architecture, it would immediately latch on and be like, IA is this chart. The chart is IA, I've got it. And so I think as a user experience professional, or if you work with IA in your job or in any capacity, a big part of our responsibility is to understand how it kind of connects to the entire experience. So this little graphic on the right kind of shows the chart being pasted in and connected to other little icons. And so IA, I think, has the power to connect and drive and change everything in the experience. I've seen projects where people rename one thing and suddenly, the whole community is like, oh wait, this doesn't belong here anymore. This is now a service in this other team, and very small changes can make very big differences. And so I think understanding AI really helps, when you look at it as kind of a system and a network. For my example of some time in my professional career where I knew I was doing AI. It was much earlier in my career. I was at a university and I was invited to represent my department in an IA project. And so I was actually joining a team of people who had been working for a year updating different departments' websites at this university. And we had focus groups, we had user interviews, we had card sorts, we had qualitative and quantitative data, all to update, you know, sometimes maybe minor, as some people would see it, like menu changes. And as a beginning experience in my career, that is not a normal, you know, setup for an IA project. Before that and after that, projects have been, you know, much less tidy. Sometimes they're neater than that. But I think I wanted to mention, sometimes I see people online like criticize other people's IA projects, and there isn't a perfect IA project. I think iteration is really important to information architecture. Our culture, our communities, they're gonna keep growing and changing, and I think it's our job to grow and change our IA and iterate it as, you know, our communities change, and that's just a part of the process. Thank you.
That's a really great point, Allison, about change, and it's like the context shifts. People shift, their needs shift, their environment shifts, changing all the time. Yeah, thanks. Okay, Kate.
Hi, my name is Kate Terrado. My current focus is that I am an assistant teaching professor at Northeastern University. I teach primarily graphic and information design to undergrads, and then also I teach in the graduate program for information design and data visualization. So this is stuff that comes from my practice. So I very much have always considered myself more of a generalist in design. And I think I considered myself that for a long time because there weren't quite labels for what I was doing. So as Tom was saying, he didn't know it was UX until it was called UX. I think my practice has been very much in experience design, where I'm kind of dealing with public spaces, working with UI UX, but also graphic design, and trying to make things for general public consumption, which is kind of a hard thing to do, to not have a specific audience. And that I think now is kind of tied up under the umbrella of experience design. And my practice has been much more in information design and data visualization. So I think that where I sort of sit in terms of IA and the practice of that is in reflection of how I teach and how I've approached my practice. I find that the use for IA for me has always been about collaboration, because I've been working with architects and developers to make these projects. And then also now in teaching, there are tools within IA that I use now to communicate with my students to make sure that we're on the same page. So I've been thinking a lot about how IA wasn't a formal component of my own education, and how I could think about that more to deliver that to my students. So I'm trying to be a little bit more reflective about my practice to bring that back into how I teach these things as well. Because again, as design and our profession is ever evolving, these are things that maybe should have labels as folks go out into industry, or if they understand that they might be doing something new and might be facilitating new tools to make across different disciplines, maybe we could kind of define those together.
That's cool. Have you figured out a go-to, do you have a go-to tool that you have found works more than not? I went through the MFA program at Northeastern as well, and Hugh Dubberly wasn't my instructor there for design theory. So for those of you who are familiar with Hugh's work, he's very much into concept mapping, and at that point in time, that wasn't a tool within my toolbox. And I didn't understand its use or its value when I saw it from afar, but I think in terms of making and using those as boundary objects to facilitate conversations or to make sure that a team is on the same page about stuff, that has been super important, and like a tool that I will
continue to use.
Yeah, I got to give a shout for concept maps. I use them. My students here know they're working on them now. I use them in my work. I find them to be an excellent teaching tool. So if you guys Dubberly design concept maps, models, his site is a great resource, Dubberly Design. But also if you're designing, what you see here is not one screen, right? There are multiple screens going on. And is there any interaction between these screens?
Yeah, so, sorry, I just put a thing up and didn't really talk about it. So this, part of why I chose this to put up is this is at the Boston Public Library, so if you're from this area, it might be something that you're familiar with, and you might also be familiar with the fact that this is one component of a larger ecosystem that all kind of ties together. So yes, some of these are kind of live feeds of certain data that comes from, this is the Central Library, Boston Public Library, so it has a feed that pulls from the branch locations to tell kind of what's going on in the different neighborhoods. On the other side of kind of that one on your far right, there's something that the client asked for called a selfie station, where you take a little selfie, and you could apply your favorite piece of text. So it's a lot of different things at once that require sort of really rigorous structure to understand how these components can work together, where we're getting information from, how people use it, how they know if something is interactive versus not interactive.
Orchestrating the whole, you need to zoom out and understand all the pieces and the relationships between them in order to be able to orchestrate an experience, an information experience like this. Yeah.
Because you say orchestrated, can I jump in?
Yes, please.
Orchestration is such an important part of IA, with some of the things that you said also in service design. A very jargony term that we use is touchpoint orchestration. It's very interesting because we work on, when we say touch points, we might be working on, like I said earlier, something printed, a call center that someone calls into for help, what's on the website, what's on the app, what am I getting on someone else's, what information am I getting on someone else's digital tools, and how all of this needs to be orchestrated to make sure that one picks up when the other one drops off. And then there is no mismatch of information. Also, the hierarchy of the information on each one of these touch points need to be according to research that is done to ensure that people, to understand which channel people go to for what reasons. So someone might go to an app for a completely different reason than they would to a website, than they would to human services, rep. So all of that is so important. Orchestration is such an important point, and it's getting more and more important. And I think service designers, we feel like we take a very zoomed out view of ecosystems, and that all sort of feeds into the work that people like you are doing, to inform the actual information architecture of websites, of UX, of spaces. Space is really important as well, because it can indicate whether explicitly or implicitly, are you welcome to sit here, or where will you find information? Should I turn left or should I turn right? And some of those things.
Yeah, those are great points. Okay, so we're going to move on to one other question, and then we'll open it up. Actually, I'm wondering how we're doing time-wise. I'm gonna cut it off here and see if people have questions at this point. Okay, and then, all right. So anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask our panelists? Yes.
Thanks. All right, my question is for whoever wants to take it. I'm curious if in the course of your professional lives you've ever had to convince colleagues, especially higher-ups, of the value of what you do. If you've run into the attitude, well, can this be outsourced? Can an intern do this? Can we just tack it on as an additional duty at the same salary to somebody? And if you have encountered that, what was your response? How did you convince the value of what you do?
Does anybody feel particularly? Tom?
I think I'll try. It happens all the time. In fact, I was thinking about, even the company I work for, there's a lot of education that's going on a daily basis, trying to, prove our value as a UX team. Which in one sense is a good thing, making sure people know why we're there. I remember a project kickoff that an email went around, this is a couple years ago, and it said something about, hey, make sure we get UX in this early. We really want to make sure we get the colors and the look and feel right. And I was like, well, wait, we don't, all right, fine, we do it. And let me get in the room and then show you what I can do. And that's really kind of it. It's more, I start to break it down in terms of, well, okay, if that's what you need to get me in the room, fine, I'll have that conversation with you, and then, hopefully reveal to them, by way of my wireframe prototyping, the ideation that might go on between us, that they realize there's something more being brought to the table.
Does anybody else want to take a stab at that?
You go ahead.
Yeah,
Kate?
I have a comment on this. I think that I've mostly worked with sort of in teams that are primarily not focused on design. So in a lot of environments in my practice, I've worked with mostly developers and other types of people. But I'm a really big believer in teaching and learning soft skills and just learning some of the language that other people are using to describe what you're doing. I think that one of the reasons why I think it's important for designers to sort of learn how to code a little bit, even if they don't want to code as a profession, is so that they can speak to developers in a way that they could understand each other. So similar to the idea of concept mapping, kind of creating a space where you have shared knowledge, whether if you're taking the same language or kind of creating those boundary conditions, at least puts you on the same page so you could understand each other's values. And I think it's just a respectful thing to do in terms of negotiating those types of transactions.
I'll just add, I find research helps a lot with that. And even if you don't have a sanction for official research, if you can do some kind of unofficial research on either whatever it is that you're working on and highlight what others think about it, or whether you are able to do a more formalized type of research, whether it's testing a prototype or usability, that can often be the thing that I've experienced that can break through to convince a larger team of the need for what you're doing. Okay, yes?
What about trying to let a client understand the importance of the steps in the process? Have you come up with any stories or analogies that you've used that you've found to be successful in getting that point across?
I guess I can take that because I'm a consultant. So I was actually going to say that we have a funny problem, which is we are hired to do a project and people pay us thousands of dollars to do it, and halfway through they're like, why are we doing this again? So the way we approach it is more and more, by we I mean MadPow, and our general approach to projects is we use participatory approaches and co-creative approaches. So it's not just about saying, hey, we're going to do this and just communicating and educating, but it's also about involving people in the process. And I love what you said about shared language and soft skills, because more and more I'm realizing that is such an important part of what I do, to be able to facilitate these discussions and take in all these opposing points of view, opposing incentives within these large organizations, and really navigate that conversation to reach the common point of what is important to this organization. And usually it's the same thing. They're just using different words to say the same thing. And by involving them in the actual design process, we have more buy-in of the solution, as well as a higher understanding. So the solution, because we unfortunately have to drop off after we finish the engagement, but by involving them, it's more likely that the thing we built together is going to be implemented, and implemented in a good way. And also to Kate's point of shared understanding, I think that recently I just finished up my education in business because, as I mentioned, I work on strategy, and that is so important for me to know what is important to business stakeholders. If I'm speaking to a CMO of a company, I need to know their metrics, I need to know their language. If we talk about our methods and tools in the words that we use, they might have a completely different mental model of what we are saying, and the onus is on us as designers to make sure that we speak their language instead of expecting them to speak our language.
Great point. Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to
Allison?
add to that. I agree so much with what all my colleagues are saying, and I wanted to say getting to know your stakeholder is so helpful for both of these questions. In my work, it's usually like deans and directors, and so if you get to know what their goals are, then when you present, solutions and challenges, you can match to what they want to have happen. So if their goal is like better marketing and brand, you can show examples, some quantitative, like, here are stats about what we've done in the past and what we can do moving forward. And then, quotes always like really stick with people, even if it's, less people have different opinions of that, but quotes also help. Just again, depending on what the stakeholder is looking for. And I was going to say, in terms of kind of negotiating like value, I found it very helpful if a higher up wants you to do something and doesn't think it's very valuable, to sometimes pull up, okay, I found average Boston web designer salaries, average and showing them this is a $500,000 investment. We're not going to be able to reach that, I understand. So here's some other options and middle grounds. It kind of helps, with just communicating. Yes.
Great. Thanks. Yep. I just saw that hand first. Yep.
So real quick, I'm just curious, as professionals, what your thoughts are on things that are kind of trends in the industry right now, like design thinking and minimum viable product.
Anybody want to take that?
My answer, I think, comes more from a teaching perspective, but I think it probably also has connections to practice as well. But I think I love that folks know a little bit of what design is, or have an understanding of, I don't know, whatever picture they have in their head when you say design. It's a thing. But I also find that, particularly with my students in my freshman classes, that people also come in with assumptions about design that are detriments sometimes to how you practice. Mm-hmm. So I think I think that unlearning some of these things, or just making sure that we don't operate with these assumptions of what design is, depending on stakeholders or students, kind of undoing those assumptions and making sure that we're all, again, sort of on the same page about things, is how I try to approach those things.
And I'm going to kind of put a little spin on that and say, have any of you found that you'll be working with somebody, a stakeholder, a client, and they will use some terms like MVP, or what's the other word you said?
Design thinking.
Design thinking. And first you even have to establish, well, what do they think that means? Has anybody had that experience?
We have, so thanks to IDEO, a lot of people now know what design thinking is, which is great, because it helps us sort of validate what we do in terms of not having to sell too hard what we do, because IDEO's done the selling for us. But that causes a problem as well sometimes, because doing a 2-day workshop or a 1-week course on design thinking does not make you an expert. But people, when they approach or learn these methods, I think a lot of stakeholders sometimes see, oh, now I know how this works. It's all about slapping Post-its on a wall, and that's how it all works. But I think you said earlier, Allison, it's like design is iterative, right? And so is design learning. I think more and more as you do it over years. I've been in it for more than 10 years. You've been doing it for 25 years. Ask me about what I knew 5 years back, and that's completely different to what I knew now. And it keeps evolving and changing. And I think that is something we struggle with, at least I personally struggle with, which is clients that have a little bit of knowledge, but not too much, and none at all, because that brings in preconceived notions that aren't always true.
Yep. Good. Good. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, right here, the stripes.
So I have a question in terms of how is your approach to information architecture changes. Right now, we have an enormous amount of information coming our way from different sources, from everywhere. Our attention span is like super tiny, right? We can't read anymore, we just skip through. And with screens scaling down to now we just read on mobile and like watch Alexa and stuff. So how and what are you predicting in the future? How else we're gonna interact? And like what is again, like how do we change our approach to information architecture in mind?
I'm thinking about the future, and I'm not, the crystal ball's a little blurry on that one, but what I think about, what you made me think about in information design is get to the point, because short attention spans being a key factor. It's something I try to think about when a lot of the times I don't have a lot of persona data to work from. I have maybe some information by way of my stakeholders who talk to our clients, but even so, once it's already once removed, if not 2 or 3 times. I do my best to try and find some empathy with what I know an analyst might be doing, sitting in front of a computer trying to work with our product. But I'm also thinking about that short attention span. They've got 50 emails. They've got a meeting to run to. They have a boss that needs the report. And how can I help them get to the point? So I try to be concise in both, my design execution, in how I, working with tech writers to make sure, that's great that you wrote this fantastic paragraph that explains everything. Now cut it in half. Okay, great. Now cut it in half again. Help me help them get their work done as quickly as efficiently as possible, so that that overall user experience is a satisfying one. That's kind of how I think about it.
I like that. Get to the point. Yeah. Any other answers?
In terms of like future technology, something I just kind of enjoy doing is looking to see what's on the horizon. And I hope like in our lifetimes we'll see there's really exciting research being done on how technology has changed our current like working memory and how our brains are essentially changing with our technology. There's really cool like neuroscience research about how you can have nodes attached to your head to like interact with technology without needing to move. And so you can only imagine like how would we redesign interfaces and technology interactions if you're no longer clicking but you're like directing with like mental like thoughts. And there's I think a lot of exciting new forefronts to consider.
Can I just add to that? Sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
This, I think, also what I think about too in the maybe a more immediate future is also how interaction design is changing more towards like gesture-based, not just like this, but more like this, and then also voice-based interactions. How do they fit into the ecosystem of these things?
Okay.
My question just tied into exactly what you were just saying, Alex Law, is the information architecture for voice technology. It must be so different because the way we frame things or phrase things is so different from writing down things or looking for information. And so I'm curious to know if anyone has actually worked in that space and where they're seeing some changes.
Well, I've not designed voice interfaces, but as a service designer, that is a touch point we need to consider. So my work has gone as far as, firstly, really narrowing down what are those interactions that someone will be willing to have over voice, which is very, very challenging to first figure out. So that's, I think, for me, a step before the actual designing of the voice interaction. And we work with great content strategists who help figure that out. Within voice interactions also, there's some already pre-made almost templates of what is the person seeking out, and what are some alternate phrasing to the thing that they're seeking out. So there's a lot of thought already that's gone into it. I won't claim to be an expert on that, but just the sometimes we have clients saying that, oh, we want to have people make an appointment with their doctor over voice. And then when we go out and do research and we see that no one wants to do that. They don't want to do that. So this is pointless. So that's all I have to say on that.
All right, any questions over here? This side of the room? Oh, wait, did I see one back there? Yes? Okay. Sorry. We'll get to you next.
Hi. So I appreciate you guys sharing your experiences. Very interesting, especially talking about building common understanding with the people that you're working with. The concept map is an interesting tool. I'm going to look into that. I was just curious about, in terms of building shared context when you're working on a project, do you change the method that you use based on the sort of UX maturity potentially of the customer or client you're working with? I think you mentioned that some customers you work with, they may not really have a deep understanding of what UX is, and I think there's more conversation now about UX maturity within an organization. So I'm just curious if you tailor your methods based on that.
I don't know if that was directed at me, but yes, the first thing we do is figure out the design maturity of an organization when we start working with them. And the way we do that is through stakeholder interviews and asking about things they've done in the past that might help us extrapolate what is the appetite for, how crazy can we go with these guys, Do we have to spend a lot of time explaining what we're trying to do? Do we need to use slightly simpler, more scaled down tools? At MadPal, we believe in customized engagements for every client. So we never use a one-size-fits-all approach with any client because they are different. And we have this whole transformation design practice within the company that focuses on, I think they call it the design fitness model. So it's a model that they use, you can just Google that and you'll find information on that. It's a model they use to analyze the design mindedness of an organization. And that's a great first step to the activities then we plan out for them. It also gives, lately I've been having this conversation of, it's a matter of like approaches that you use as well as where you want to end. What is the appetite for that end point? Are they just looking for incremental ways to improve their tools and services? Are they looking for the radical next big idea that's going to change everything? Can they even do that? Are they held back by regulations? So try and understand that. But a lot of the times people end like in the middle. So they make all these partnerships and invest in technology that help them get away from the industry a lot, but don't be so transformative and radical. So that's all conversation we have going along with the client, and depending on where they want to end, the processes and activities that we do are all tailored to get us there.
It sounds like there's a practical aspect. It's very practical. It's not just like oh, you get a client project and now you can go to town and you can sprinkle design magic dust on everything. That there's a realistic
business end to this.
It needs to work for the client. They need to be able to implement it, or
exactly
nobody's going to be happy.
Yeah.
All right. Right here in this. Do you still have a question? Yes. Okay.
Thank you. So at the company I'm working at right now, user experience design has been kind of implemented fairly recently. And so they're starting to use a lot of terms like MVP or sprints, a lot of that kind of language. But I feel like their kind of understanding and implementation of those like techniques are a little bit different than kind of what they actually are. And so when I'm trying to like sit down and work on projects with these people, they kind of assume that things will be done a lot quicker, or when they say things like it doesn't have to be pixel perfect, they're asking for like, full-on mock-ups and stuff like that. So I've tried to kind of sit down with people that I work with and kind of explain, oh, well, I think what you're asking for is a lot more, so I think it'll take more time. So I'll need like this amount of time, and it's going to take this amount of work. And basically they tell me like, well, like you don't have that, so you're just going to have to work with it. And so when I'm trying to build these products or help them work on, new ideas, a lot of times, like, I don't have time to, like, ask questions or clarify assumptions and kind of get through kind of the details before getting to the actual final product. And so oftentimes I feel like it kind of feels like I'm building a house by painting the parts first before, like, building the structure. And so I guess my question is, like, when you're working with people like that, how can you kind of, like, explain to them the value, I guess, of really slowing down and trying to understand the details first before you, like, start diving right in?
I mean, I wonder about the participatory aspect, but,
So what I want to say about that, my favorite designing tool is a whiteboard with dry erase markers that work. And grabbing a colleague and bring them in the room with me, and we work out some ideas together. That might be another UX designer. It might be the project manager. It might be a developer. It might be a stakeholder. And I start exposing them to my process and letting them share in that. And one of the things, just part of what I've learned about my own work is I'm not always the one with the best design answers in the room. I'm gonna, try to put forward my own best design solution, but I respect the expertise of the other people in the room, and if I can get one or more people in there with me and we start sketching some stuff out, that helps them understand, at least, that it starts with a sketch, and then I can start to let them know, hey, you've got this MVP. To me, having come from the advertising world, everything was deadline driven. You also didn't touch anything if there wasn't a client attached to it. That meant there was a budget attached to it. Now that I work in the software development world, there's proof of concept that has its own MVP. There's, beta versions, version 1.1, and these things sometimes don't always have clear launch dates or deadlines, and that's really uncomfortable for me, because one of the first things I want to find out about MVP is the most valuable product means how much can we get done by a certain date. That's how I translate that. And if they can't tell me, just give me the month in the all of 2020. When are we supposed to be going out the door with this thing? I work backwards from there in my mind about, like, how much time am I going to need. So from that whiteboard sketch into sitting down in front of Acture, which is the primary tool that I use today, I start to just rope them into the process. It's probably the best sort of way I can get people to understand exactly. If they give you some crazy deadline, 3 weeks to do something that really takes 3 months, I say just try and go for it. Show them what can get done in 3 weeks, and then sort of renegotiate. If that's available to you in terms of how much. A lot of things get de-scoped when MVP gets closer and closer to the desired launch time. So maybe it's something where you do your best under the conditions and let them understand exactly what's needed. Maybe for next time. Maybe next time the MVP will be a little bit more forgiving. So that's.
So I think, your description that you started with, where you bring somebody else into the room and you start whiteboarding, I mean that is participatory on a really basic scale. It doesn't have to be like a big client orchestrated 1-day, 2-day workshop. Yep. And what I think of is kind of in that process of, you've got a problem that you need to solve and you have a whiteboard and you have somebody else, when you start to go through that process, that questions come up. And do you find that?
And very often those questions are coming from me, and I get my best work done through collaboration. I probably give a little too much emphasis to that in my work, but it tends to work, and then it's appreciated. And going back to the earlier question, I think that also helps people understand, non-practitioners of UX and information architecture, they start to get it, after a while, and I think that's sort of the slow burn of helping them understand what we do.
Like there's something to be said to having the questions come up, not you working on your own, but
Right.
with other people. Have you guys found that to be useful? Kind of team working through?
I did want to add, when it comes to sprints, the bigger my professional network has gotten and the more colleagues I talk to, developers, designers, I've learned that very few organizations do quote unquote official, real quote-unquote sprints. A lot of organizations say we're doing sprints or we're using sprints or agile or lean, but then they tweak it. And so it's actually a big relief sometimes to hear oh good, lots of different organizations aren't necessarily following what the book says a sprint is supposed to be. So sometimes it's just nice to know everyone, lots of people use the terms and you work with what you got sometimes.
Yeah, I think even the company I work with now, bless them, I think they're more agile, aspirational than actual agile. It's an ongoing thing. We're sort of debating whether or not are we true agile or are we waterfall? And we're probably somewhere in between.
Okay. How are we doing for time? Should we?
Yeah, 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes? Okay. Are there any? Yes, over here.
So I was just curious, have you ever wanted to do a design project but couldn't do it due to limitations with technology?
So did everybody hear that? The question is, have you ever wanted to do a design project but you've had limitations due to technology? Like you've had an idea that you haven't been able to, the technology isn't there yet?
Yeah.
I want to say not specifically that, but one of the things I aspire to, whether I get it or not, is I prefer to design to the technology available, not necessarily to the technological skill in the room. But then reality, the rubber hits the road and you need to work with what you've got, kind of thing. So it's not about, it hasn't been for me yet about technology that's out there or isn't out there yet, and can't I design for that? Wouldn't it be great if I could design for that thing that doesn't exist yet? Haven't quite got there yet.
And for me, I believe so much in scrappy innovation that often we'll be working with stuff and we're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could do X, Y, Z, but it's either the technology doesn't exist or it's really expensive to implement. If we ever find ourselves in that situation, we try and scale back on the technology needed and think about other ways to hack that. So whether that's a human being doing it or a paper form or something else, some other way to hack it so you don't need technology. So I'm a firm believer of that. But in terms of projects that I'm passionate about, at least in my company, I'm very empowered to take on anything that I want to do, and nothing can stop me from doing anything I want to do. So whatever it may be, I think that often you can just start, I think. Because you asked me that question, I feel like you have something in your mind that you want to do.
I feel like I'm wondering.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm trying to read your mind here. But if it's something that you want to do, just start. And the technology will come, or you'll find some way to work around it.
And just to add to that, I definitely, as a person that has worked a lot in exhibit spaces, as the primary designer, lead designer on these projects, I think part of my job was to sort of imagine just random stuff and not even think about the technology and let the professionals deal with that a little bit. So yeah, I've definitely had projects that I are more aspirational than anything else, but I definitely agree that prototyping an idea in whatever materials you have is often revealing, because it doesn't, sometimes you can scale it such that you could do the thing without the original technology that you had in mind for a different scale. And then as you kind of continue with the idea or iterate upon it or try to keep it going in different ways or bring in other people, then you kind of get more access to different things.
I love that. Okay, so I think we've had some wise words. And I think with that, we'll wrap up. So I'd like to thank you guys very, very much, panelists, for sharing your expertise and your experience, your wise words with us. Okay, great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody for good questions.
Thank you so much. So I'll see you back here at about 1:20. Please do come back. The afternoon speakers are just going to be amazing. I'm just about to tweet out a list of recommended lunch locations, if that would be helpful. We'll also do the raffles after lunch. See you back here soon. Thanks.